The wrestling world lost one of its most electric performers when Roddy Piper died suddenly in his sleep on July 31, 2015 at just 61 years old. The man who could ignite an arena with nothing but a microphone and his razor-sharp wit was gone, and the cause of death sent shockwaves through everyone who knew him. If you're a fan of wrestling history and want to see more deep dives into the legends who shaped this business, hit that subscribe button right now because we're just getting started with stories that need to be told. Roddy Piper was found dead in his Hollywood home, and the initial reports were confusing and contradictory. His body was discovered by family members who had grown concerned when they couldn't reach him. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office would later confirm that Piper died from a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that travels to the lungs and blocks blood flow. But this wasn't just a random health event that came out of nowhere. The pulmonary embolism was directly connected to deep vein thrombosis, a condition where blood clots form in the deep veins of the body, usually in the legs. What made this particularly tragic was that Piper had been dealing with serious health issues for years, issues that were directly tied to his decades of punishment inside the wrestling ring. The weeks leading up to his death painted a picture of a man who was still active and engaged with life despite his health problems. Piper had been making appearances, doing podcasts, and staying connected to the wrestling community that had given him everything. He had filmed scenes for a new season of his show on the Audience Network and was preparing for several upcoming projects. Friends and family said he seemed in good spirits, though some noticed he looked tired. The fatigue wasn't surprising given what his body had endured over the years, but nobody expected what was coming. Just days before his death, Piper had posted on social media, interacting with fans and promoting his work. Then suddenly, silence. When family members went to check on him at his home in Hollywood, they made the devastating discovery that would end the era of one of wrestling's most iconic figures. The pulmonary embolism that killed Piper was the final blow in a lifelong battle with injuries and health complications. To understand how he got to that point, you have to look at the absolutely brutal career he had in professional wrestling. Piper started wrestling as a teenager in the 1970s, and from day one he was taking bumps and hits that would break most people. He wrestled in an era when the business was even more physically demanding than it is today, with fewer safety measures and a culture that glorified working through pain. Piper had been in some of the most violent matches in wrestling history, including his famous dog collar match with Greg Valentine that left both men bloody and battered. He had taken chair shots to the head, been thrown through tables, and absorbed countless impacts that modern science now tells us cause serious long-term damage. But the physical toll of wrestling wasn't the only thing destroying Piper's body. He had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2006, a type of cancer that affects the lymphatic system. Piper fought the cancer and went into remission after treatment, but the disease and the aggressive chemotherapy he underwent left lasting damage to his cardiovascular system. Cancer treatments, while life-saving, can have severe side effects on the heart and blood vessels, increasing the risk of blood clots and other cardiovascular problems. Piper's battle with cancer was something he talked about openly, using his platform to encourage others to get screened and take their health seriously. He beat the cancer, but his body never fully recovered from the combination of decades of wrestling injuries and the toxic but necessary cancer treatments. The deep vein thrombosis that led to the fatal pulmonary embolism was likely brewing for some time before it killed him. DVT often develops when blood flow slows down or becomes sluggish, which can happen for many reasons including immobility, surgery, injury, or underlying health conditions. For someone like Piper, who had decades of trauma to his legs and lower body from wrestling, plus the cardiovascular damage from cancer treatment, the risk factors were stacked dangerously high. The blood clot probably formed in his leg, potentially without him even knowing it was there. DVT can be silent, causing only mild symptoms like swelling or pain that could easily be mistaken for the everyday aches and pains of a former wrestler. Then, at some point, a piece of that clot broke off and traveled through his bloodstream to his lungs, where it lodged in a blood vessel and cut off oxygen to part of his lung tissue. The result was sudden, catastrophic, and fatal. What makes Piper's death even more heartbreaking is that it was potentially preventable. If the DVT had been detected earlier through screening or if he had been on blood thinners to prevent clot formation, he might still be alive today. But like many wrestlers of his generation, Piper had a complicated relationship with doctors and medical care. He had spent so many years being told to tough it out and work through injuries that seeking medical attention for something that seemed minor probably didn't occur to him. The wrestling business had conditioned him to ignore pain and push through discomfort, a mindset that serves performers well in the ring but can be deadly when it comes to serious health conditions. Friends said Piper had been experiencing some leg discomfort in the weeks before his death, but he attributed it to old wrestling injuries and didn't think much of it. The autopsy report revealed the full extent of the damage Piper's body had sustained over his lifetime. Beyond the immediate cause of death, the report documented evidence of extensive trauma consistent with a career in professional wrestling. There were signs of old fractures that had healed improperly, damage to his joints and connective tissue, and the lingering effects of his cancer treatment. His heart showed signs of stress and previous damage, likely from the combination of performance-enhancing substances that were common in wrestling during his era, the physical demands of his career, and his battle with lymphoma. The picture that emerged was of a body that had been pushed far beyond normal human limits for decades, finally reaching a breaking point. Piper's family was devastated by his sudden death, describing him as a devoted father and husband who had been looking forward to spending more time with his children and grandchildren. His wife Kitty Toombs, whom he had been married to for over 30 years, spoke about how Roddy had been trying to slow down and take better care of himself in his later years. He had stopped doing the most physically demanding appearances and was focusing more on podcasts, interviews, and lighter promotional work. But the damage was already done. Decades of abuse to his body couldn't be undone by a few years of taking it easier. The wrestling business had taken its pound of flesh from Roddy Piper, and on that July night in 2015, it collected the final payment. The wrestling community's reaction to Piper's death was immediate and overwhelming. Wrestlers from every generation shared stories about how Piper had influenced them, helped them, or simply entertained them with his unique blend of charisma and intensity. Vince McMahon released a statement calling Piper one of the most entertaining and controversial superstars in WWE history. Hulk Hogan, who had some of the most iconic feuds with Piper during the height of wrestling's popularity in the 1980s, posted an emotional tribute talking about how much he would miss his friend and rival. Current wrestlers who had grown up watching Piper expressed their shock and sadness, with many noting that Piper had been one of the reasons they fell in love with wrestling in the first place. The outpouring of grief and respect showed just how much Piper had meant to the industry and to the fans who had followed his career. What made Piper so special wasn't just his ability to work a crowd or cut a promo, though he was among the best ever at both. It was his authenticity and his willingness to be vulnerable. Piper never pretended to be anything other than what he was, a fighter from the streets who had clawed his way to the top through sheer force of will and talent. He talked openly about his struggles with addiction, his health problems, and the darker side of the wrestling business. In his later years, Piper became an advocate for wrestler health and safety, speaking out about the dangers of the business and the need for better medical care and support for performers. He knew firsthand how the business could chew people up and spit them out, and he tried to use his platform to make things better for the next generation. The funeral service for Roddy Piper was a private affair attended by close family and friends, though tributes poured in from around the world. Wrestling shows across multiple promotions held moments of silence in his honor, and several special tribute shows were organized to celebrate his life and career. Fans created makeshift memorials outside wrestling venues, leaving flowers, photos, and messages thanking Piper for the years of entertainment he had provided. The WWE aired a special retrospective on his career, showcasing some of his greatest matches and promos. It was a bittersweet reminder of just how talented and important Piper had been to the industry. In the years since his death, Piper's legacy has only grown stronger. New generations of wrestling fans discover his work through streaming services and YouTube, finding themselves captivated by his intensity and charisma just as fans were decades earlier. His Piper's Pit segments are still studied by aspiring wrestlers as masterclasses in how to generate heat and tell a story. His matches are analyzed for their psychology and storytelling. But beyond the professional accolades, Piper is remembered as a complex human being who gave everything he had to his craft, sometimes at great personal cost. His death at 61 was a stark reminder of the physical price that professional wrestlers pay for our entertainment. The conversation about wrestler health and longevity that Piper helped start before his death has continued and expanded in the years since. More attention is being paid to the long-term health effects of repeated head trauma, the cardiovascular risks associated with the lifestyle and physical demands of wrestling, and the need for better medical screening and care for both active and retired wrestlers. Piper's death from a pulmonary embolism linked to DVT highlighted the importance of cardiovascular health monitoring, especially for individuals with his risk profile. Some wrestling organizations have implemented more stringent medical protocols, though many independent wrestlers still work without adequate health care or safety nets. The industry has a long way to go, but every step forward is in part because of advocates like Piper who refuse to stay silent about the problems. Roddy Piper's sudden death on that July night in 2015 robbed the world of one of wrestling's most dynamic personalities and left a hole in the industry that will never truly be filled. The pulmonary embolism that killed him was the final chapter in a story of physical sacrifice that began when he first stepped into a wrestling ring as a teenager. His body, broken down by decades of punishment and ravaged by cancer, simply couldn't withstand one more assault. But while his death was tragic, his life was extraordinary. Piper entertained millions, inspired countless wrestlers, and left behind a body of work that will be studied and celebrated for generations. He was never the biggest or the strongest, but he was undeniably one of the most captivating performers to ever lace up a pair of boots. The hot rod burned bright and fast, and when the flame went out, it left the wrestling world a little bit darker. If you made it this far and want to keep exploring the untold stories of wrestling's greatest legends, make sure you're subscribed because there are so many more incredible tales to uncover about the people who shaped this business.